Okay, sorry about that, guys. I'm not entirely sure what just happened. I thought we were live, and it looks like we were not. So, looks like everything's running now. I thought we were live, and it looks like we were not. So. Okay, I don't know what the hell just happened. Everything went wrong for a minute there. So, good morning. Yeah, I don't know. I hit the button and it said that things were going, and then it didn't. So, sorry about keeping you guys waiting this morning. I know I'm running about 10 minutes behind because of that little snag, but here we are. Cameron's not with us this morning. He's got a prior engagement that he has to deal with. So, what I wanted to do this morning, there are a couple of video essays that I want to produce. And so I'm just kind of thinking out loud on one of those topics in particular this morning. We just had a midterm election, and we saw some interesting things happen there. And I want to talk about some of the takeaways that we get from those. And it's not that it's new information. It's that it's information that is largely has been largely overlooked or missed by the public at large, and the public is in fact the problem. So you look at this past midterm, and the Democrats had some interesting wins. John Fetterman, who is, less mentally competent than the current president of the United States, and guys, that is a hell of a statement. That Joe Biden is even allowed to feed himself his own pudding is elder abuse. The man is in rough shape. Fetterman is in worse shape than that. And he's still not the most alarming pick. In a way. He is the most alarming pick in most ways, because let's be real. Americans saw his debate performance, and voted for him. Americans voted for John Fetterman, at least in theory. I think it's John. Anyway, Fetterman got elected, and he's just not there. The man had a stroke and has clearly not recovered from it. And another important thing to understand about his not having recovered from the stroke sufficiently, in the case of stroke victims, any gains that have not been made back in the first 6 months are extremely unlikely to be made. Right, after a stroke, statistically, you have about a 6-month recovery period, at the end of which you've gotten back to about where you're gonna get. So Fetterman's not going to get substantially better. There's an outside possibility, but outside. Stryker says they did not vote for him. The system voted for him. Stryker, you are right, but I suspect you are right incorrectly. And that's part of what I'm about to dig into. So, as many of you know, I had a hobby degree in philosophy. I studied for several years after I got out of the Army. I went back to college to get a degree, and I was in a certain position at the time, not dissimilar to my current position, where I didn't have a real need for a degree, professionally speaking, but I had a GI Bill to dispose of, and it seemed foolish to just let it sit there. I always wanted to study philosophy when I was younger. I used to read, I used to read Descartes recreationally when I was a teenager in my early 20s. For example, always been a big fan of reading and studying deeper philosophy. And pertinent to today's conversation and kind of thinking out loud about this video essay that I want to work on is some work by Soren Kierkegaard on the concept of the crowd. In fact, there are three primary concepts that I want to tackle with this: the crowd, the press, and something that he called the leveling process. So let's go to the leveling process first, and then I'll develop you on the crowd to get back to Stryker's comment about how they did not vote for him. The system, quote unquote, voted for him. See, the leveling process, as Kierkegaard described it, has to do with the social dissolution of heroes, the social disregard of achievement. And he would explain it by one of his examples would be, you see a beautiful woman who is ice skating, and not only is she beautiful on the ice and nice to look at for that reason, but she's quite talented. She's an exquisite skater. She is exhibiting specific skills and talents that are beyond the ken of a person who's just strapped on a pair of skates, and even a person who does it frequently, who isn't a dedicated artist, a dedicated practitioner of the form. A very good skater who's not a very good professional skater will move around in smooth circles at high speeds and stop successfully without falling on her face. Whereas a high professional is going to start doing the flips and the sow-cows and the triple twists and all that really interesting Olympic skating type of stuff. The leveling process that Kierkegaard talks about begins with this idea that there's nothing particularly special about this person apart from what they did to become the special person that they are. Anybody, even Lizzo, in this mindset, anybody could do what this person has done and become what this person has become. The problem with this line of thinking is it removes the obvious and brute fact that anybody did not do what this person did. Right? You could say the same of a president. You could say the same of Donald Trump or Joe Biden. The fact of the matter is, while anybody may have been able to become the president, the 46th president of the United States, as Joe Biden did, the fact of the matter is, whether you believe it to have been done nefariously, whether you believe it to have been achieved legitimately, whether you believe he's qualified or not, the fact of the matter is that he did achieve the office. Even if by hook or by crook, which is not relevant to this particular conversation, the fact of the matter is he did what he did and had the result that he had. But the leveling process, once begun, can never be stopped. according to Kierkegaard's thinking on the matter, because the problem with the leveling process is that anything done to arrest the development of the leveling process is another leveling process. So, take for example the civil rights movement, right? Coupled with the Great Society. Oh, okay, hey, everybody gets equal rights. Okay, great. Everybody gets the vote. Everybody gets, all the same rights as everybody else. Good stuff. Oh, but that doesn't make everybody equal. Just because everybody has the right to vote, everybody has the right to work, everybody has the right to whatever, they're not enjoying equal outcomes from the exercise of those rights. Because we ignore the choice component, right? We take out the part where you step back and you say, yeah, anybody could have gone and lifted all the weights and taken all the steroids and become Mr. Universe. But that doesn't mean that anybody did. Somebody did. But that somebody achieved it, and that it is possible for someone else to have achieved it had they made the same choices. Right, forget about genetic proclivities, which are obviously a part of this equation, but within the confines of the philosophy of this process, anybody could have done all the beef hormones and lifted all the weights and done all the working out and become Mr. Universe, but not anybody did. Oh, thank you, dear. You're the best wife. Yes. Thank you, baby. But yeah, so anybody could have, but not anybody did. And that brings us to the crowd. Kierkegaard put forward this idea that there is a thing called the crowd. And what he meant by the crowd, or the public, he would call it also, the public is not merely a collection of individuals. It's not merely a disorganized mob of people. It's not merely the concept of the open space that's available to the common citizen. The public, according to Kierkegaard, is an entity unto itself. The public has its own will. There's a similar concept that you're all likely at least passingly familiar with, called the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, right? The kind of common agreement of the crowd, of the public. People, the zeitgeist includes what kind of music the majority of people find appealing. It includes what kind of fashion sense people generally have. And more importantly, the zeitgeist includes the current political fashion, the current political trend. There is a manipulation of that zeitgeist, which is coming to light with all the stuff with Twitter. And we're learning more and more, as we have suspected in the past, but are now seeing the evidence of, as we've discussed on the show many times recently, that zeitgeist, that perceived zeitgeist, that perceived radical left-wing bias that seeks to abort your children and mutilate your progeny is not actually what the zeitgeist contains. Rather, it has been proved through Elon Musk's work and exposés on not just Twitter, but on several other social media platforms, that what has occurred over the last decade and change is that fake accounts, bots, sock puppets have been used to artificially inflate the appearance of dramatic left-wing bias in the general opinion of the public at large. And that brings us to the other concept, the press. So Kierkegaard described the crowd as, or the public, as being a single, massive entity which is made up of all the constituent parts of the individual citizenry beneath it, and which has its own will, which, though slow-moving, contains the resultant or the median of the will of the people. The crowd, the public, will do things, right? And sometimes those things are prefer cheeseburgers over tacos and therefore result in there being more burger joints than taco joints. And sometimes it will prefer a political candidate over another. What we see now with Fetterman's election, and like I said, he wasn't the only interesting outcome in this recent midterm. Let's not forget, the same Democrats that elected John Fetterman elected 3 other people to the Congress. I know. You're about to hear these words come out of my mouth, and I can't believe I have to say them. The same people that elected John Fetterman elected 3, that's right, 3 dead people, all of whom died more than a month before the election, and their names were still on the ballot. And it's not just that their voters went in and voted D, just checked the D, went straight for the Democrat Party without knowing anything about the candidate. They knew so little about the candidate that they didn't even know that the candidate was dead. How can you possibly go and cast your vote when you are so inadequate to the task that you would cast your vote for a dead person? Now, I'm sure there's an argument to be made that, I didn't vote for the dead person. I voted against the evil Nazi Republican because I'm a good Democrat. There are no good Democrats. Let's just, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but there are no good Democrats. If you have voted Democrat in the last 10 years, you have voted to support child mutilation, infanticide, post-birth abortion, et cetera, et cetera. If you have voted Democrat in the past half a decade, it is your fault that Russia invaded Ukraine. But again, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. And Alex, yep, that's basically the point I was making there. Alex says, I'd vote for a dead Republican before a living Democrat so that there's a special election rather than handing it directly to the Democrat. That's fair. So let me back up to the conversation that I intended to have. The public has its own maneuvers and it takes actions like voting. And the public it's not just not held accountable for anything. Because of the nature of what the entity is, it is impossible for the public to be held accountable. Now, being held accountable and suffering consequences are not the same thing. The public does suffer the consequences of its madness, right? For example, they voted a bunch of Democrats in who ran on the platform of shutting down American oil independence, and the result has been your milk has quadrupled in price, right? The result has been an explosion of every cost. Your entire cost of living has been dramatically increased. The fact is that your wealth has been devalued. And to say that it's the unfortunate result of necessary actions is a lie. The fact of the matter is, it was the plan. They want you poor, and that's a whole nother video essay that I want to work on. when the crowd conducts activities, it does so above the capacity for reproach. And we can sit back like I'm doing now and criticize the public and say that the public got it wrong. And it's not unheard of or even uncommon for the public to get things wrong. Like how we were totally going to sell Amtrak back to the private sector after 4 years. 52 years ago. But they get things wrong. So the public is an entity unto itself. It has its own will, it has its own activities, it conducts its own actions, and is unaccountable. The press is a similar type of entity. Now, individual press outlets can be held accountable. Individual press outlets can suffer criticism that goes into litigation and even prosecution and suffer legal consequences. Yes, the individual press outlets, the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, they can individually suffer consequences, but the press is itself an entity which is made up of it's made up of the individual reporters, the individual agents of the press, and of course those are sub-organized into the individual agencies of the press. But much like a cancer in a body, it's very difficult to excise only the cancer without removing healthy tissue as well. And in many cases, it's very difficult even if you remove an unnecessarily large amount of what one might find to be an exorbitant amount of healthy tissue around the cancer. It doesn't guarantee that you've removed the cancer entirely. And once the cancer has occurred, the likelihood of its reoccurring increases over time. And the more it reoccurs, the more likely it is to reoccur again. So the press is a sub-entity of a subcategory, a sub-entity of the public. The press is likewise unaccountable. The press at large, right? The total entity of the press. No matter what you can do to individual agencies, like Rittenhouse filing a bunch of lawsuits, or Nick Sandmann winning a bunch of lawsuits, you'll notice that Sandmann made an absolute shit pot of money. But that hasn't stopped the press from doing things like suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story, or hiding Ashley Biden's journal, or even weaponizing the law enforcement wings of the U.S. Department of Justice against other, shall we say, rogue agents of the press like Project Veritas, to take literally illegal actions against press agents engaged in First Amendment activities. Anarchy asks, but aren't the monies of those lawsuits coming from the taxpayers? No, not technically. I can just about guarantee you, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, Anarchy, because it's entirely tertiary to the activity, to the exercise. But the money from the lawsuits should be coming from the coffers of the individual companies that were sued in those cases. Now, it would be irresponsible to suggest that the deeply tied relationship between the press and the DNC is such that if one were to assume that the Democrats, who are masters of money laundering, are not laundering money from the taxpayer through those entities and back into the pockets of DNC membership, it would be irresponsible not to assume that that's happening, because it's so clearly and obviously happening in all of their other enterprises. They don't want government funded abortion on demand because just because they want to kill your children. It happens to be an incredibly convenient way to launder taxpayer dollars into the pockets of Democrat politicians. So there's a lot more that I want to get into on this particular topic. And like I said, the point to this show today was to kind of explore some of these thoughts, kind of think out loud on these topics. The last piece that I want to touch on a little bit, because this will be a part of this same video essay once I get it produced, is the importance of individual politicians. That factor has changed, obviously. And Alex made the point. Alex actually made this point for me when he said, I'd vote for a dead Republican before a living Democrat so that there's a special election rather than handing it directly to the Democrat. Yes, that's absolutely the case. And that is the case for most Americans. We have become party voters. One of the things we talk about on this show often is our disdain for the current elected Republican body. Currently elected Republicans are, by and large, trash. I can hardly think of one that I would not instantly replace with any other Republican, right? I cannot think of one currently serving Republican whose sudden death would make me feel a great deal of sadness. One possible exception is Ted Cruz, because he does have a habit of engaging in social media in a way that I find amusing, right? I might miss Ted Cruz the way I miss any other lesser comedian. He did a great bit with the Babylon Bee the other day, where a couple of kids came up and knocked on his door. They were canvassing for Beto O'Rourke, and Ted Cruz answers. They're like, "Hey, can we count on your vote?" And he says, "No, sorry, I'm busy." And then he drops a piece of paper, and they pick it up, and it's the Zodiac Killer cipher. Stryker, I might give you MTG. Not Rand Paul. Rand Paul is weak sauce. I want to like Rand Paul, but Rand Paul is a child on foreign policy, and that's unacceptable. And Mitch, I'll give it to you. Thomas Massey, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, good guys overall, but how is our cause hurt by the loss of any of those men? What I'm talking about is a politician holding a seat and doing a job. When you vote for a Republican, the best you can hope for is that they'll hold the seat, do nothing, and slow down the infinite march into the abyss that the Democrat Party is so hell-bent on. The best you can hope from any Republican in living memory is that they will stall the destruction. The only exception to that, honestly, is Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually just removed, hey, this red tape is bullshit. This stupid regulation is bullshit. These taxes are too high. This is too much. This is too much. Donald Trump got into office and started getting rid of regulations and rules and making it easier for people to go forward. But back to the point of the party over the politician, the Democrats, likewise, do not care who the politician is. The politician, like a John Fetterman, does not make policy. The party does. The politician doesn't even, and this is even more true of the Democrat than it is of the Republican, because the Democrats simply do more. The Democrat is constantly pushing more and more and more and more law. Right? They're less interested in what laws are than that laws are. Now, a part of this problem is similar to the problem of one of the problems in academia is this idea, this publish or perish idea. I'm sure there's a similar tagline that politicians use. Academicians will just write trash academic papers just so that they are publishing X number of papers a year so that they can tell a college that they're working for their money, that they're earning their living, when they're clearly not. Politicians will go look at the docket from any recent legislative session, and more than half of what they did will be, oh, well, we changed the name of this high school to pay homage or respect to this celebrity, historical figure or politician. We changed the name of this, we changed the name of that, we established a foundation to X, Y, and Z. You'll find that very little of the agenda included, oh, well, we recognized a problem which we had the legal authority to intercede on behalf of, and we went forward and created this legislation which enacted these specific activities engaged by the government which have the actual result of solving a problem. You will not find a great deal of that on the docket. Ever. It's, oh, well, we renamed this post office to honor the postmaster who'd served there for 50 years and just passed away. Okay, that's cool. That's nice. It's a lovely gesture. And sure, if you got a postmaster that served the same post office for 50 years and he dies and you want to rename the post office after him, that's awesome. That shouldn't cost 100,000 taxpayer dollars. That's hey, is this a good idea? Yep, done. No money. Right? Except for, okay, you buy the guy a plaque, but the plaque doesn't cost $1 million or whatever that line item says it cost on the docket. Right? Stryker says you can't have horses vote. It's always nay. And Stryker, I'm suddenly on board. Mr. Ed for 2024. Let's do this. But the party, you vote for the party. The politician doesn't make choices or decisions. The politician holds a seat. The party tells the politician what to think. So if we want to improve our country, if we want to take back our country, one of the things that we need to do, quite separately from run candidates that aren't trash, is we need to adjust the party. The Republican Party platform needs to switch from conservative to restorative. Because Republicans have failed. They can't conserve anything. They can't conserve the family. They have not been effective at conserving the lives of children. They have not been effective at conserving your constitutional rights. The only thing Republicans in living memory have managed to conserve are 10-year-old Democrat policies. But on both sides of the aisle, we've stopped voting for politicians and only vote for parties. You can run a ham sandwich in a blue district and they will walk away with it. But the same is true in a red district. I like to think that it is true to a lesser extent, but that I don't have evidence to that fact. I don't have evidence to support that claim. A Stryker says the people need to assemble and give oversight to their public servants more than every 2 years. You know, somebody was talking about, Stryker, somebody was talking recently about a law, and buddy, I'd be on board with this. In fact, I'd add it to my list of the very few laws that I want to see, that I would like to see passed. And that is, every law has to be renewed every year. Seriously, the House and Senate have to vote on, and the president has to sign off 1 year sunset, maybe 2 year sunset on every single law. Because if a law is not important enough for the government to vote on again, it doesn't matter. It's bad law. Right? And if it turns out, and it would, if it's the case that there are simply too many laws for them to vote on in a given year, then there are too many laws. Right? You've got the government assembled, you've got the Congress assembled, you've got the Senate assembled, and it's an up or down vote. Hey, do we still think murder's bad? Yeah, murder's still bad. Hey, do we think embezzlement is still bad? Yeah, embezzlement's still bad. Hey, did banning fracking work out for us for the last 2 years? Well, now, hold on a minute. There's one we can talk about. I'm not sure if that was a good idea. Okay, up and down. Right? And if a law is not important enough to be voted on every 2 years, shut that shit down. It is still illegal. There is still a law that forbids explicitly tying your pet giraffe to a telephone pole in downtown Atlanta. Now, that law sitting on the books and never being violated because people don't have pet giraffes to walk around with is an archaic, an anachronistic example. But it's an example of a law where, this law doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for this to be a law anymore. But it doesn't necessarily make sense to let people walk their giraffe in downtown Atlanta. Okay, so you've got a law here that's utterly anachronistic and unnecessary. Let it fall off. Let it go. Because, you know what? See, Alex, okay. I'll get right back to you. Right back to that. That's a great point. And I'm actually making an argument related to that. With the giraffe thing, people have grown somewhat, and this is going to be true with other activities. People don't walk a giraffe downtown. They don't tie a giraffe up to the light pole. Right. The problem was somebody had a pet giraffe. They walked it downtown. They tied it up to a light. This is not a random funny story that I'm telling you. The giraffe was tied up to a light pole. It bit into an electric line. It died, and the city ended up having to dispose of the giraffe. And that's why there was a law then enacted to say, hey, no, you can't bring your giraffe downtown. One would think that what they would have said is you cannot have a pet in town that weighs more than X, but instead they said no giraffes. And that is City of Atlanta. It's one of those funny blue laws, like you can't fart in an elevator in Colorado, and you can't walk down the street with an ice cream cone in your back pocket in New York City. But so Alex says you're operating under the premise that they would actually debate rather than rubber stamp. Let's say for a moment, Alex, that what happens is they just go ahead and rubber stamp every law when every law is brought up for debate every 1 year or 2 years or even 4 years. Here's the thing, though. Right now, the only way to get rid of bad laws is to go through the arduous task of repealing the law. What I'm suggesting is a situation where, yes, they would likely rubber stamp the majority of laws, but every period of time, 1, 2, 4, whatever years, the entire book of law would be opened up and made available to debate. So yes, right? Murder gets a rubber stamp. We still think murder's bad. Embezzlement gets a rubber stamp. We still think embezzlement's bad. But what's a good example? Speed limits. Speed limits were pushed down on the states by a federal extortion racket. And I'm not even saying speed limits are bad. I'm saying that their initial implementation was a little shady. They were pushed down on the states by this federal monies extortion racket, kind of the same way that seatbelts and the drinking age were. So why can't we revisit that and open it up for debate, right? And the debate may very well, and I would expect it honestly, to support the speed limits remaining, and that stays there. But then you start to have options where, oh, well, okay, whoa, we're rubber stamping everything this year, but hold on a minute. Let's take a look at this one. Our health insurance costs have become astronomically high. And the Supreme Court has refused to do its job on this. And we even had Paul Ryan and John McCain sabotage the efforts of the duly elected president and House and Senate to try and correct this obviously glaring problem. It's up for renewal this year. Why don't we go back to having health insurance that people can buy? Why don't we go ahead and debate this one? Right? Every law comes up for a debate. Does not necessarily mean that every law gets debated. Yes, the majority will be rubber stamped. But to make it so that every law is essentially made vulnerable to repeal, I think that would go a long way to clean up what is essentially a problem, probably the biggest problem we have in this country, which has resulted in the problem of the deep state, and that is eternal, unquestioned, dogmatic even, unreasonable laws. So, yeah, Mitch, that's exactly what I mean. Sunset provisions on every law has a sunset provision. Just that's one new law. And every law has a sunset provision and has to be debated and renewed, even if it's just a rubber stamp period, including, check this out, the law that says that every law has a sunset provision. So, okay, I'm 20 minutes over, even though I started 10 minutes late. I'm going to have to go ahead and wrap it up, guys. I got things to do. So, love you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, real quick. Dave points out, and yes, this is actually part of the point. Dave points out, parties out of power would keep lists on laws they would fight to the death on every year. Absolutely. So not only would it have all of the benefits that I just described, where we start cleaning up the books and getting rid of bad law more and more, it would create a situation where politicians would actually have the ability to take some meaningful action in those regards. And suddenly they've got a lot more to argue about, right? And we could put a stop, or at least dampen this absurd cycle where the only thing that any politician is ever arguing about is gay marriage and abortion. Right? Obergefell was almost 10 years ago, and there are still people arguing about gay marriage. How are you still arguing about that? Win or lose, that's over. Whether you got what you wanted or not, we did that. Right? Now, and I'm not saying that you just let it stand, but there's other shit to work on. And some of it, believe it or not, matters. Y'all be safe.